It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview Dave Kaplan, who is the owner of the Beyond the Box Score. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Brandon. How are you?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to start a basketball podcast?
It's funny. I actually didn't. With the pandemic hitting last, I was listening to a lot of podcasts. I was still working long hours. So I'm, listening to podcasts. And I kind of, I had a college radio show back in 2010, but outside of that, I hadn't really thought to ever get into radio or podcasts. But when I was listening to the podcast for sports, the same questions getting asked over and over, and it was filled with, coach talk. And I'm so anti-coach talk that I was like, I hate to sound cocky, but, I could do better. I could ask the questions that's how I started doing the
How did you come up with the name of your
podcast.
How did you come up with the name of your podcast, Beyond the Box Score?
It's a great question. I didn't want something that pigeonholed the podcast just to basketball, even though primarily, I have basketball coaches and people on there. But, so many coaches I know have bad records, and it's not because of their coaching abilities or lack thereof. It's they don't have the resources, they don't have the scholarship allotments of other teams, location, support. They have to schedule, games against Duke and Carolina to get a paycheck. So I thought to look, the beyond part of the, Beyond the Box Score podcast, kind of look outside the record and what the stat sheet might not show.
How did you come up with finding people to interview?
Basketball has been very good to me. Not financially, but it's been very good to me. And so I've gotten to meet a lot of great friends and, people through the game of basketball. And for whatever reason, we've stayed in touch. And, a lot of assistant coaches, especially at the non-Division I Power 5 level, have really interesting stories. And just getting to know them, I'm like, man, I don't know how ESPN hasn't done a story on you before. You just have such an interesting journey. So that's kind of how I got, that's how I got it done.
Who are some of the notable people that you have interviewed that somebody would know about?
Oh boy, I like to say everybody's a name, everybody's a popular person, but as far as just your people who aren't sports nuts or basketball junkies, Danny Mann, Matt Doherty, coach at Carolina, Notre Dame, a few other places, Rex Walters, Howie Schwab. He was the host of Stump the Schwab, worked for ESPN and Fox Sports for years. Tony Shaver, legendary coach at Hampton-Sydney College, Episcopal High School, and most notably William and Mary. Abar Rouse is somebody who you might not know the name, but with Baylor winning the national championship, he was actually really the whistleblower on the previous coach who had tried to cover up a murder, and really great man, great person. Has sadly been sort of blackballed by the industry. But when you mention the Baylor murder cover-up scandal, and you say, oh, he was I think it was the graduate assistant, the director of basketball operations. Oh, I remember him, because he had been on some notable, ESPN, ABC, CNN during that time. What was it, 20-some years ago now?
How do you go about finding some of the people that are not locally by you?
Like I said, basketball has introduced a lot of great people. And, I tend to not reach out to sports information directors. They do a phenomenal job. In another life, I'm probably either a lawyer or sports information. However, part of me feels that just through knowing all these coaches, I kind of, I don't know how to put this the right way, but I shouldn't have to go through a third party for the people that I have on that I know on a personal level. And so that's one of my unofficial rules is I don't like to go through a sports information director, an agent, publicist, any of that kind of stuff. I don't like to have people on who, promote things I have done in the past, but, for the most part, also, I don't let people screen the questions. I do make exceptions. There have been coaches who are going through as far as a buyout or firing and not able to speak on certain things. And so I have done that. But for the most part, just the word of mouth, in coaching, you're somebody. And so I've kind of used that with the podcast as well.
Speaking about, of course, not going through SIDs, can you talk about the process of not going through SIDs? Because I know personally for me, whenever I get college coaches, most of the time I do have to go through SIDs.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm sure that some SIDs would like me to go through them. But usually, whether it's a text or DM to coaches, either follow me or I'll hear them on another podcast, such as yours, or one where I go like, man, I feel like they did a really good interview. I have questions that weren't asked that I bet they would answer coming from a coach. And so whether it's, a friend of somebody I've had on the podcast, I've had people reach out to me. It's usually me reaching out to them, but I'm certainly open to having people who've reached out to me who I think have an interesting story. I don't shy away from big names. I don't shy away from people who don't even have a Wikipedia page. I mean, I'm a nobody in this business. I'm proud of that. And so the other kind of, quote unquote, nobodies or people that are, kind of just behind the scenes are the people that I really like to have on because, everybody knows the Tubby Smith or the Roy Williams or the Coach K stories, but, the Dennis Harringtons, the Sean Dempsey's, the Sean Jameses, that the average day person doesn't know who that is and probably couldn't pick them out of a lineup.
Of course, when going through the process of getting coaches, do you only interview mostly D1 coaches and D2 coaches? Along with, do you also interview women's basketball coaches?
That's another great question. I will interview anybody who I think has an interesting journey, an interesting story that can inspire others. Lord knows I need inspiration. I'm listening to some podcasts. I'm like, man, I'm going through it, going through a losing streak. Didn't get a recruit that I wanted. So, I need some inspiration from time to time. So I've had somebody from the Ohio State women's volleyball staff. I've had the interim Florida State women's basketball head coach. I wouldn't say a lot of Division I head coaches just because they have so many media obligations already. Not that, the podcast universe is important, but, they're having, national radio, national television, ESPN, spots, ACC network. So I would say more the small college basketball, whether it's Division II, Division III, a lot of assistant coaches. We were talking about before we went on air that, coaches' schedules are so fluid. And I would say especially so for the assistant coaches because they're the ones they have stuff on their plate and then the head coach or somebody else in the oh, hey, by the way, can you do this for me? So I would say probably without looking back, a majority of my guests have been assistant coaches at the small college level. Also, not sure how many of the listeners realize it, but at the Division I level, especially, you have support staff roles, which are like director of basketball operations, video coordinator, director of recruiting, um, special assistant of the head coach. And so I like to have some of those guys on as well, just because they're not in those roles. You aren't go on the road recruiting, and so they might not get to even meet and network with other Division I coaches, but they have really unique and interesting stories. I'm always blown away, especially meeting them, whether it's through working camps or just through networking. Like how more people don't know who they are, because they are the behind the scenes people, but the teams that part of have had a lot of success, and they play a large part of it.
How has your podcast Beyond the Box Score, how has that helped you in your professional career coaching wise?
Wow, another great question. I'm not sure that I'm honest with you. It's taken some time away. I've tried to, I guess, in the business, if we can even call it that. I try to have some episodes in the can where I record a whole bunch and sit on them for a while so that I can devote my full focus and energy to the basketball programs I'm coaching. I would say that it's expanded my network in a little bit. I jokingly always say to the coaches of the Division I level, "Hey, don't forget me when I need a buy game. If I'm at a D2 or D3, we need to go play somebody for a $5,000 game. Maybe make it 15,000, and we'll talk." But it's been able to connect me with some schools at the 4-year level, so that players at the JUCO that I coached at this season might be on their radar, because before or after the podcast, we're talking about, oh, hey, by the way, what are you looking for as far as your recruiting needs? Man, we have a guy who fits that profile. So I guess in that regard, it's helped, but I separate the two. I don't ask any of the coaches that I coach with to be on the podcast, just because I don't want to make it weird or anything. If it even can get weird, I guess a podcast is weird altogether, because you're hoping that people will listen to it, and it's not exactly on the radio. You really have to search to find it. So I've been fortunate that I have a pretty loyal following on social media and in the podcast altogether.
Can you talk about, of course, what it was like to get all these college coaches during COVID, where if you started before COVID, you would have had difficulties getting them?
Yeah, no question. Absolutely. Yeah, I benefited from COVID in that regard. It's hard to say people benefited outside of, Walmart, Costco, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer. But yeah, I think a lot of coaches, and I'm probably guilty of this on this podcast, like to hear themselves talk. And I think that, what they have to say is really, really important. And so a lot of people wanted to, share their journeys. They wanted to, and I always say, I have no time constraints. I've had a coach go for 2 hours. I've had coaches go for 30 minutes. It's all the same to me. So can you go ahead and ask that question again and clip this out?
Yes.
Yeah.
How has COVID helped you with your podcasts starting before COVID and during COVID?
No, I've definitely benefited from it, along with Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and Walmart. I've definitely benefited from COVID in that regard. A lot of coaches have been sitting at home and sharing more ideas than usual, as far as coaching clinics that have been online and being more accessible to be on podcasts or Zoom conferences. So in that regard, yes, I've benefited from it. A lot more people are near their phones, since they weren't coaching in March Madness. They weren't on the road recruiting and being able to have an auto reply, "Hey, on the recruiting trail, hey, you back next week." Like, no, I know that you're not doing anything, because we're not allowed to leave our homes. we're all quarantined, so we're all in the same boat.
What are some of your future plans with Beyond the Box Score?
Whew. I didn't know that it was going to last more than 20 episodes. I'm nearing 100 some episodes, and I never thought it would be possible. It was a hobby. It was something to help pass the time. I don't I've just started using Zoom. I haven't done this maybe 5 or 6 years. And so I am actually using Zoom the way you are doing yours and extracting the audio. I distribute it through Anchor. I don't make a cent, a dime, a penny, anything off the podcast. As far as sponsors go, I don't do advertisements. So, I do have a microphone that I don't typically use. My laptop, I use my phone, use the Anchor app. I'm pretty old school in that regard, nothing fancy. I do, as long as coaches are benefiting from it and enjoying it, out of it, and my employer doesn't mind me doing it, if I have their blessing, I'll probably continue doing the podcast for a while.
What advice would you give upcoming future podcasts looking to interview college coaches just like me and just like you?
Wow, great question. Probably, I'd say the same advice that Coach Ed the Cellist at Navy gave me about coaching. Don't do it. But in all seriousness, be patient. There's going to be a lot of editing and technical production stuff that if you don't have someone for you or you don't have a background, it's not going to be perfect. I routinely ask because there was an issue with the audio talking over people because of the playback and stuff above my head. But I always said focus on the content more than the technical stuff. I don't need the fancy graphics. I don't need fancy intro music. I have some basic versions of and graphics, but I worry about the content. I focus more on the guest, what they have to say. They're the star. It's not the person asking the questions. It's like being an assistant coach. You just want to stay out of the way. You want to put your players and your head coach in a situation to make themselves look good and have success, but you just want to be in the background and stay out of the limelight.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find your podcast Beyond the Box Score at?
You can find it on Twitter. The handle is Coaches Podcast. You can find it Apple Podcast, Anchor, Stitcher, any of those podcast formats. It's available. The Beyond the Box Score podcast, Beyond the Box Score on Instagram. I can pull it up to make sure I have the right. It's let me see. It's at Beyond the Box Score podcast, all one word. And you can follow me. My personal Twitter is at Coach Cap, KAP. I'm happy to give any advice or help. I guess what you call us podcasters or sports media people. Give them some pointers or help them learn from some mistakes and some, let's say, the process I've gone through. I said I love listening to podcasts. I don't listen to music when I work out. I listen to podcasts. I'm always looking for good ones. I've enjoyed listening to yours. You've got a wide variety of coaches, speakers, people in the. So I'm always looking for good podcasts. So hit me up, DM me, DM open, whatever that means, and send me your podcast. I'll be happy to listen to it.
Thank you again for your interview, and best of luck with Beyond the Box Score.
Thank you.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, And you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again for an interview, and best of luck with Beyond the Box Score.
Thanks, Brandon.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.